The moment she walks through the door, something subtle changes, not loud, not dramatic, just off. And if you've ever felt that quiet discomfort in your chest but couldn't explain why, stay with me until the very end, because what you'll understand there will change how you see these moments forever. And if this kind of psychological insight helps you make sense of relationships, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps more than you think. Now, listen carefully. When a woman has crossed an emotional or relational boundary, her nervous system doesn't reset the second she gets home. The body remembers what the mind wants to hide. One of the first things that often happens is a sudden shift in emotional temperature. She may seem unusually distant, overly calm, or strangely rushed. This isn't guilt in the dramatic sense people imagine. It's regulation. She's subconsciously trying to stabilize herself before interaction begins. You might notice she avoids eye contact, not because she's afraid of you, but because eye contact creates emotional resonance when someone is holding two conflicting realities, who they are at home and who they were moments ago. Direct connection feels overwhelming, so she busies herself cleaning something that wasn't dirty, checking her phone, moving from room to room with no clear purpose. Motion becomes a form of emotional noise, a way to avoid stillness where thoughts can catch up. Another common behavior is an abrupt change in tone. She may sound unusually polite, almost formal, or on the opposite extreme, slightly irritable. This isn't random. When someone is hiding something, they often overcorrect. Politeness becomes a shield. Irritation becomes distance. Both serve the same function, preventing closeness, because closeness invites questions, and questions invite truth. You may also notice she talks less about her day than usual, or talks too much about insignificant details. This is psychological misdirection, often unconscious. By controlling the narrative, she feels a sense of safety, not because she's evil, not because she planned to hurt you, but because the human brain prioritizes self-protection when identity feels threatened. Here's the important part. Most men miss these behaviors are not proof. They are signals of internal conflict, not automatic betrayal. Many emotionally intelligent women experience deep guilt long before they experience clarity. So before anger, before confrontation, understanding must come first, because later you'll realize this isn't just about what she did when she got home. It's about what she's trying to survive inside herself. Another thing that often happens is a sudden need for privacy that feels out of character. Not dramatic secrecy, not locking doors, just small, quiet withdrawals. She may take her phone with her everywhere, the bathroom, the kitchen, even short walks around the house. This isn't always about hiding messages more often, it's about maintaining psychological control. The phone becomes a grounding object, a reminder of the version of herself she just was, and the one she's afraid of losing. You may notice she changes her routine immediately. A shower, she didn't plan clothed straight into the laundry. A sudden focus on personal hygiene that feels urgent rather than relaxed. This isn't just physical, it's symbolic. The brain is trying to create a boundary between before and now, between who she was out there and who she needs to be in front of you. Her speech patterns may shift too. She might speak more carefully, choosing words with unusual precision. Or she may joke more than usual. Using lightness to avoid depth humor in these moments isn't joy, it's deflection. When emotional weight feels too heavy, the mind reaches for levity. As a release valve, you might also feel something harder to name: a lack of emotional availability. She's there but not present. Her responses are appropriate but hollow. This happens because emotional energy has already been spent. When someone has invested attention, validation, or intimacy elsewhere, whether emotional or situational, there is often a temporary depletion when they return home. It's not that she doesn't care, it's that she's internally fragmented. Sometimes she may become unusually attentive, asking if you're okay, offering help, doing small, thoughtful things she hasn't done in a while. This confuses many men. They assume care means innocence. But psychologically, this can be a form of self-repair. The mind tries to balance internal scales. Kindness becomes a way to reduce discomfort without addressing its source. What's important here is restraint. Jumping to conclusions shuts down truth. Accusations activate defense. And defense is the enemy of clarity. The behaviors you're observing are not confessions. They are symptoms of dissonance. When actions and values temporarily collide, and here's the quiet truth, most people won't tell you. The more emotionally intelligent a woman is, the more visible this inner conflict becomes, not because she's careless, but because she's human. What matters is not catching her. It's understanding what these shifts are preparing you for, because what comes next isn't about her behavior, it's about your awareness. One of the most overlooked changes happens in how she manages emotional space. When a woman is carrying a secret that conflicts with her values, she often creates subtle distance without realizing it, not by pulling away completely, but by reducing moments of shared vulnerability. Conversations stay surface level, deep topics get redirected. Silence stretches longer than usual. This isn't accidental. Emotional depth increases the risk of exposure, not of facts, but of feelings. You may sense she's unusually sensitive to your mood. If you're quiet, she becomes uneasy. If you're affectionate, she may freeze or respond inconsistently. This hyper-awareness comes from guilt-driven vigilance. When someone feels they've crossed a line, they often scan for signs of suspicion. Even when none exist, your neutral expressions may suddenly feel threatening to her nervous system. Another common response is a sudden shift in boundaries. She might become more rigid about personal space, or paradoxically more physically affectionate in a controlled way. Both are attempts to regulate anxiety. Distance protects her from emotional resonance. Controlled closeness reassures her that the relationship is still intact. Neither comes from clarity. They come from fear of loss paired with fear of truth. You might also notice she becomes more defensive about unrelated topics. Small questions feel like accusations. Innocent curiosity feels intrusive. This happens because the brain enters a protective posture. When someone is hiding something, they unconsciously expect to be discovered. So every question carries imagined weight. Defense rises, not because you're wrong, but because she's internally bracing. At this stage, many men make a critical mistake. They try harder. More affection, more questions, more reassurance, but pressure collapses. Fragile internal balance. When someone is already overwhelmed by inner conflict, external intensity feels threatening. Even if it's loving, the most powerful thing you can do here is observe without judgment. Calm creates contrast, and contrast reveals truth. When you remain steady, her internal turbulence has nowhere to hide. Not because you are manipulating the situation, but because authenticity cannot survive in constant self-monitoring. This is where clarity begins to form, not through confrontation, but through consistency, because the human psyche eventually seeks relief, and relief always moves toward resolution. What you are witnessing isn't cruelty, it's cognitive dissonance in motion, and it doesn't last forever. As the internal pressure builds, another shift often appears. Control, not over you directly, but over the environment. She may become particular about small things, how things are placed, how plans are followed, how conversations flow. This isn't about preference, it's about reclaiming stability when someone feels emotionally unsteady. Controlling external order helps quiet internal chaos. You may also notice a change in how she reacts to affection. Compliments that once landed easily may now be deflected or minimized. Touch may feel brief or rehearsed. This happens because genuine intimacy amplifies self-awareness. And when self-awareness brings discomfort, the body subtly resists. It's not rejection of you, it's avoidance of self-confrontation. There is often an increase in mental fatigue. She may seem tired without having done much emotionally, flat, easily overwhelmed. Holding conflicting identities is exhausting. Being one person outside and another at home creates constant self-monitoring. The brain doesn't rest when it's guarding a secret. It stays alert, hypervigilant, drained. Another sign is inconsistency in values. She may speak strongly about honesty, loyalty, or boundaries, sometimes more passionately than before. This isn't hypocrisy in the way people assume. It's an unconscious attempt to reaffirm identity. When behavior and self-image misalign, people often verbalize their values louder, hoping to reconnect with who they believe they are. You might also feel a strange emotional reversal. Things that used to upset her no longer do. Things she once cared deeply about feel suddenly irrelevant. This emotional flattening is a defense mechanism when emotions become dangerous because they risk revealing too much. The psyche turns down the volume. At this point, silence becomes informative. What she avoids saying matters more than what she says. Noticing patterns matters more than catching moments. Truth doesn't usually appear as a dramatic confession. It leaks through tension, misalignment, and emotional residue. This is also where many men start doubting themselves. They sense something is wrong, but logic tells them nothing is provably wrong. This internal split between intuition and evidence creates self-doubt, and that doubt is often more painful than the truth itself. Remember this, your role is not to interrogate, it's to stay anchored. Calm presence is grounding. It doesn't force answers, but it makes hiding uncomfortable because when one person remains emotionally steady, the other eventually has to face what they're carrying. And when that moment comes, it rarely looks the way people expect. There often comes a point where her emotions begin to leak in unexpected ways. Not in confession, but in contradiction. She may oscillate between closeness and distance within the same day, warm in the morning, cold by evening. This emotional inconsistency isn't manipulation. It's internal tug of war. Part of her wants normalcy, another part feels undeserving of it. You might notice she becomes unusually reflective or unusually dismissive about the relationship. Comments like people change or nothing lasts forever may surface casually. These aren't threats, they're cognitive rehearsals. The mind sometimes prepares for loss before it happens, softening the psychological impact if things unravel. Another subtle shift is how she responds to your trust. If you express confidence in her, she may quickly redirect or downplay it. Trust becomes uncomfortable when someone feels they're violating it instead of relief. Reassurance can trigger guilt, and guilt seeks escape, not comfort. She may also begin to test emotional safety in indirect ways, picking small arguments, challenging minor decisions, questioning your reactions. These moments aren't about the topic at hand. They're about gauging whether conflict leads to rejection. When someone fears the consequences of truth, they probe the edges of stability. At times, she might appear unusually nostalgic, referencing earlier moments in the relationship. This isn't always longing. Often it's grief. Grief for a version of herself that felt more aligned. More whole people mourn identity quietly long before they mourn relationships openly. You may also sense a shift in accountability. She could become quicker to justify small missteps or explain herself excessively. Over-explanation is often a sign of internal anxiety. When someone feels morally exposed, they try to control perception through narrative. This is where patience becomes power, not passive tolerance, but grounded awareness. When you stop chasing certainty and start observing patterns, clarity accelerates. Emotional truth surfaces fastest when it isn't cornered. And here's something rarely acknowledged. Many women who find themselves here are not celebrating what happened. They're struggling with it. The story in their head is not freedom, but fracture, not excitement, but consequence. Understanding this doesn't mean accepting betrayal. It means recognizing the psychological terrain you're standing on, because what comes next, whether truth, distance, or repair, depends less on her next move and more on how you hold yourself in this space. The most revealing change often happens quietly in her relationship with truth itself. Not lies in the obvious sense, but a softened relationship with reality. Answers become vague. Timelines blur, certainty dissolves into, I don't remember, or you are overthinking. This isn't always deliberate deception. It's psychological distancing. When truth feels dangerous, the mind creates fog, so no single detail feels sharp enough to hurt. You may notice she avoids future-oriented conversations. Plans feel tentative, commitments sound conditional. Even positive talk about the future may carry hesitation. This happens because the future forces alignment, and alignment requires honesty. When someone is unsure who they're becoming, they avoid anchoring themselves to what comes next. Another subtle sign is emotional outsourcing. She may seek reassurance from places other than you. Friends, distractions, constant stimulation. Not because you are insufficient, but because your presence mirrors her conflict with you. She feels seen, and being seen is uncomfortable. When parts of the self feel unfinished or compromised, there's often a noticeable shift in how she handles accountability. Instead of taking responsibility or engaging openly, she may reframe issues as misunderstandings or mutual faults. This isn't about blaming you, it's about diluting internal guilt. Shared blame feels lighter than personal responsibility. At this stage, many men feel an urge to demand clarity, to force answers, to collapse uncertainty, but urgency rarely produces truth. It produces defense and defense, delays resolution. Emotional safety, not pressure, is what allows honesty to surface. What matters now is self-respect without hostility, calm, boundaries without threats, presence without pursuit. When you stop trying to manage her inner world, you reclaim your own, and that shift is felt immediately, not consciously, but viscerally. Here's the part most men don't expect. When you stop chasing explanations, the dynamic changes. The emotional mirror turns. She becomes the one feeling the imbalance, because unresolved guilt cannot coexist with your grounded silence. It seeks release. This doesn't guarantee confession. It doesn't promise repair, but it guarantees clarity, because when one person stands firmly in self-awareness, the other must eventually choose between truth and distance. And that choice, more than any behavior you've observed, is the real answer you've been looking for. Everything you've heard until now leads to one essential truth. Most men were never taught. What hurts the most is rarely the act itself, but the erosion of emotional certainty. The mind can survive pain. What it struggles with is ambiguity, and when ambiguity lingers, it slowly teaches you to doubt your instincts. Here's what matters more than any sign, behavior, or pattern. You are not meant to live in a state of constant interpretation. Healthy relationships do not require decoding. They do not ask you to become hypervigilant or emotionally small just to maintain peace. When something repeatedly pulls you out of your center, that disruption is information. If she carries unresolved guilt conflict or divided attachment, it will eventually express itself in one of two ways: truth or withdrawal. Not because you demand it, but because the psyche seeks coherence. People cannot live indefinitely in contradiction without choosing a direction. Your responsibility is not to fix her internal struggle, it is to protect your emotional integrity. That means staying observant without becoming obsessed. Open without becoming exposed, calm without becoming numb. When you do this, you send a powerful, unspoken message. Connection is welcome, confusion is not home. And here is the part I asked you to stay for. The deepest power you have is not in discovering what she did when she got home. It's in recognizing what you will and will not tolerate going forward. When you know that uncertainty loses its grip because your stability no longer depends on her explanation. If truth comes, you will be strong enough to face it. If distance follows, you will be grounded enough to survive it. Either way, you return to yourself. This is what emotional maturity looks like. Not control, not fear, but clarity anchored in self-respect. If this perspective helped you see your situation differently, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. This channel exists to give you the psychological understanding most men never receive but deeply need. And remember this: when you stop chasing certainty outside yourself, you become the one thing no confusion can shake.